Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the Q&A session of today's call. At that time, you may press star 1 if you would like to ask a question. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to Ms. Stephanie Shearholt. Thank you. You may begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our news conference to discuss the agency's progress on the Space Launch System, the heavy lift rocket under development to take humans beyond Earth orbit and to Mars. My name is Stephanie Shearholt. Joining us today are NASA Associate Administrator Robert Lightfoot and Bill Gerstenmaier, NASA's Associate Administrator for the Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate. We'll get started shortly, but a couple of operational notes for you. Your phones are obviously on mute. To get into the question queue, you can press star 1 on your phone. After we've given remarks, then we'll open it up to questions and answers. Please stick to one question and identify to whom you're directing your question. If we have time, we'll allow reporters to ask a second question. About 1 hour after we conclude the call, you can listen to a replay of the teleconference. The phone number to listen to that replay is 866-365-4119. The passcode for that is 2246. Again, the replay number is 866-365-4119, and the passcode is 2246. That will be live about an hour after this call concludes. So now I will pass it over to Mr. Lightfoot.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon. We want to provide an update on the excellent progress we're making in development of the Space Launch System, or SLS. The heavy lift rocket that we think is going to take us beyond low Earth orbit and ultimately to the moon, to Mars. Our nation is embarked on a very ambitious space exploration program, and we owe it to the American taxpayers to get this right. And that's what this Key Decision Point C, or KDPC, process is all about. Let me give you a little background on what KDPC means for those of you that may not know. That is a critical milestone for any program or project that the agency assesses. It's comprised of 2 key areas of review. The first is the technical side, and the second is a programmatic assessment. I chair that meeting as the Associate Administrator, as the decision authority for these. For the technical side, at KDPC, the agency assesses the project's successful completion of their preliminary design review, or what we call PDR, and it grants approval to proceed to the critical design review, or CDR. On the programmatic side, the agency uses KDPC as the Agency Baseline Commitment, ABC, as we call it, Agency Baseline Commitment Point, to our external stakeholders on cost and schedule that we expect to achieve. That cost and schedule is then combined into what we call a joint confidence level between cost and schedule, and we set that at 70% when we go through this process. This is also the commitment that we're held to in regards to breach reporting as we move through the development process. We found recently, let's say the last 3 or 4 years, that this 70% confidence level is in a pretty good measure for setting our agency baseline commitment for any of the projects that we do in the agency. We also routinely have programs and projects that work to internal dates that are more aggressive, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we move forward. Like I said, I chair this review, and I hear from the program, the SLS program, the Human Exploration Mission Directorate in this case, come and present to the agency. And then we have a standing review board, which is a group of independent reviewers that are assembled to assess the program and bring forward their key milestones as well. I then take the advice of those folks and several other members of the convening authorities, including the chief engineer, the chief financial officer, folks like that support us, and we decide on where we should head as an agency. This is what happens on all programs and projects within the agency. So this is kind of our process from an agency standpoint, and it's a big step for us. This is a commitment that we make. So for SLS, we held our review in January, and based on the PDR results from last August. As for the technical assessment, there are absolutely no issues with the great progress the team had made, and they were cleared to proceed from a technical standpoint and press toward critical design review. In fact, as Bill Gerstenmaier will share later, they're proceeding with several of the subsystem critical design reviews already. On the programmatic side, one of the requirements we work to in the agency as we set these commitment dates and dollar amounts is to reconcile the differences in assessments. And you might imagine that the Standing Review Board and the program come in and they may have a different opinion of the risk or related to some of the issues that they're going to be facing over the development cycle. So we've been wrestling with that over the past few months and trying to reconcile those. That's a requirement for us to reconcile those, so that me, as the one committing the agency to a baseline, I need to make sure we're making the right commitment and one that I can defend. The reconciliation of those risks, whether they're the uncertainty levels, what we expect those risks to occur, how we expect them to happen, if they might happen, that is all fed into a model, and that model then generates based on an integrated schedule, based on the cost, will provide us a joint confidence level as we move forward. So, as I said, setting this 70% has worked well for us last years in science, and today this is the first one we've ever done for a human spaceflight program. So it's pretty exciting for us to try to apply what we consider very much a best practice to the human exploration program as we move forward. So today what we're doing is we're rolling that out, and what we've decided approved through the key decision point process, as you've probably already seen the press release, is that the SLS flight is no later than November of 2018, with a budget of $7.021 billion for development, and that's at a joint confidence level of 70% for the agency. So, pretty exciting stuff for us here in terms of how we're moving forward. It's really important to note, and Bill will talk about this a little bit, that the team continues to make great progress. They're still working to the same plan they had before we set this date. This doesn't change their planning date. We recognize that they'll incur challenges as we go forward, because we're getting into the meat of the program, and the folks will be moving forward from there. It's also important to remember that we're building a series of launch vehicles here, not just one. This is not just one mission. This is for us the start of a kind of a production model for how we're going to develop the vehicles we need to take folks beyond low Earth orbit. Basically, moving from a 70 metric ton vehicle for EM1 to eventually a 130 metric ton rocket that'll carry folks to Mars. So that's where we are. Again, I couldn't be more proud of the SLS team and what they've done to get us to this point. First time we've had a human spaceflight program make it through this decision gate that the agency has, and very confident as the team moves forward for SLS readiness for the first flight for EM1. We'll take some time after this. We'll hit ground systems, which will be the next piece of this, and they're following right behind the Space Launch System. We'll get their key decision point, and we'll see where they line up, and then we'll do Orion in early 15. And at that point, we'll then bring those three elements together, and we'll be able to assess the readiness for the actual first launch of EM1. But I must remind you, we got to remember this is not just a one-time flight. This is setting up a system for us to use as we continue to explore beyond low Earth orbit. And with that, to share some of the progress the SLS team has made, I'll turn it over to Bill Gerstenmaier to share some of that.
Thanks, Robert. Again, I think we kind of put this all in context. The SLS team has been working on this project for roughly 3 years, and they're still basically on that same internal schedule. We're still on that same internal schedule today. So as Robert described this to you, it's a kind of a little different concept in the fact that as we go through preliminary design review, that's when we get all the requirements ready for the rocket, and we're ready to start into development, head towards the critical design review where we actually start building hardware. We then the agency asks us to snap this line in the sand and essentially build an agency baseline commitment, which Robert just described to you. But what we're doing internal and what the teams are doing internal is they're working to kind of a day-to-day schedule that actually will be ready before this ABC. In fact, you don't want to have your ABC and your planning work line up on the same date, because then you have no margin as the problems occur and things crop up. You want to have those pieces. So I think it's important that we don't think of this as a slip to the team, that we've moved till this date of 2018. In fact, the teams internally are still on the same schedule they've been for the past 3 years, and we're making significant forward progress. And some of that progress is evidenced when you go down to the Michoud Assembly Facility. You can go see the robotic weld equipment that's down there. We're going to have a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a large vertical assembly center that will assemble the large barrel sections together. That'll be on September 12th. You can actually see some of the barrel sections that are there. Those are the first sections that were put together as proof welds. They're large 40-foot sections. Those sections then get welded together by this new machine, the largest welding machine of its type. They essentially just kind of get placed in, moved up, welded, and inspected, and moved on. This is modern manufacturing at its best. All that equipment is in place. You can see that. You can see the significant progress that's occurring down at the chute assembly facility. Also, if you go down to Stennis, you can see RS-68 or RS-25 engines in the A1 test stand. They're ready to begin testing probably in October, November. We need to test these engines at the conditions that they'll see underneath the SLS. The SLS is a little different than where they were in the shuttle, so the inlet conditions to the engines are different. The start box is a little bit different for the engine, so we'll do that testing, and we're in the process to begin that activity down at Stennis. The other thing that's unique about this program is, you know, most programs at this stage at preliminary design review wouldn't have essentially 16 flight engines available to be used. They would typically be off trying to manufacture engine development. Typically, engine development has been a long lead item in new rocket development. We're able to leverage off of the shuttle program, and we essentially have 4 sets of flight engines available to us. ATK is the solid rocket boosters. Again, we've completed the developmental test firings of those previously. We need to do 2 qual firings of those boosters. The pour for that next qual test will be this fall, and then we'll go into the qual test in the spring. So again, that's on track. So the major elements of SLS are all on track. The teams are making good progress through this process. I would tell you that there are some risks in front of us. We know there's challenges in front of us as we look at this large manufacturing. I'm sure some things will show up. The teams are ready to go deal with those. We've put some avionics together in Marshall Space Flight Center so we can actually start looking at the avionics. That's one area that the Standing Review Board, as part of this joint confidence level development and this model development, told us we needed to watch. We've got some avionics systems together so we can start seeing how that software interacts and works together, and that's gone well at Marshall. They've also done acoustic testing at Marshall to go look at the load of the engine start on the bottom of the rocket as the engines come to life and liftoff begins. They've also done some structural modeling and some structural tests to go look at how the solid rocket boosters react into the core stage. So again, the program is making real significant progress towards this activity, and we're happy to be here at this KDPC point. This is a major milestone for us to have the agency tell us essentially we're a formal program, we're ready to commit to this, and we've established a commitment for our external stakeholders, and I think we're ready to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, great. Thank you both. We will move to the Q&A portion now. Let me remind you once again, if you would like to ask a question, please dial *1 on your phone. You'll be put into a queue. When you get to ask your question, you'll be announced, and your mic will be opened up. Please state your question and identify to whom you're addressing your question. If we have time, we'll allow reporters to ask a second question, but please stick to just one for the opening round here. So I'll let the operator go to the question line.
Thank you. At this time, our first question comes from Mr. Eric Berger with Houston Chronicle. Your line is now open.
Good afternoon. Mr. Gerstenmaier, I was just asking about the 2018 date. It's my understanding that the issues with that date are less about the SLS and maybe more about the Orion. Can you comment about the biggest concerns you have in terms of possibly losing a year and going from 2017 to 2018 for the EM1?
Yeah, again, I would say that the discussion today really is about SLS, so it's the Space Launch System, and it's important that we see this as a launch readiness date for the SLS. And this ABC is, again, the agency commitment. We fully expect to be there in front of that date. That's what the teams are marching to today. And I think it's the right approach. When we talk about launch date, we have to have a couple elements come together that all come together in a launch date. So there's the SLS, and we'd like to have the rocket ready first. The next phase is to get the Kennedy Space Center ready to go receive that rocket, and then we can ship the rocket down there. And then the Orion capsule, or the payload piece, essentially goes on top, can come at the end. So we're kind of going through these these activities through this formal agency review process methodically. We did SLS first. As Robert described to you at the beginning, we'll do ground ops very soon, probably in a month. We'll have the agency commitment for ground ops. And then at the first part of the next year, as Robert said, we'll have the agency commitment for Orion. And then after we've got those commitments together and we get a little bit further along in the actual development of the hardware, more towards the critical design review time frame, we can start talking about exactly where the launch date is. So, I think everybody kind of wants to focus on the launch date and when is that first date. It's probably sometime in the 2018 time frame, but we don't want to get too specific now. We want to let them go work through the process, see how this stuff comes together, and lay those out. And I can't stress enough what Robert said in his opening remarks. This isn't really a single flight. We're building a system that's going to be around for multiple decades that allows us to take human presence into the solar system, accomplish missions such as Mars. And to do that, we need to get a system that's producible, that we can afford to fly on a repeatable basis. And to do that, it's going to take more than just focusing on one single flight. So I caution us all to not get too hung up about that first launch date. We need to really look at this as an integrated package and make sure we've got the right overall sequence that gets us the ability to move humans into the solar system as soon as we can, economically and affordably, as we take steps towards Mars.
Once again, if you have a question, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. There were some that queued up for questions, but if you will press star 1 again, so we can get those questions back in queue.
I believe Kenneth Chang was next, so if you just want to go to him while everybody else, if you press star 1 again to get back in the queue.
Sure, one moment. Mr. Chang, your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I guess my question is, how does it compare to what Constellation Ares 1 was? I mean, a lot of what I'm hearing right now, it sounds reminiscent of what everyone was saying back then.
I guess I'll start, and then Robert can kind of complete. With Ares 1, we never got to the KDBC milestone. All we got to was really KDP-B, which is just a general commitment with not really firm dates. This is a major step for SLS. This is the agency commitment we're making to our external stakeholders. This has reach criteria associated with it. It establishes a budget, it establishes a schedule, and it establishes a fairly rigorous analysis process to build this joint confidence level. So I would say that SLS is really, as Robert said earlier, and I'll emphasize again, is really the first major human spaceflight program to achieve this milestone we call KDPC. So it doesn't relate back at all to what we had done in the Constellation program.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. That's exactly where we are. We were in KDP-B, or in Phase B is what we call it in Constellation. We never got this far back then.
Take the next question.
Thank you. One moment, please. And the next question comes from Miriam Kramer with Space.com. Your line is now open.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question. So I'm curious about what the KDPC means for people on the ground. Does that mean that there are test articles being built and sort of moving forward with that? And I suppose this is for Mr. Gerstenmaier.
Well, hey, let me jump in and get this as Robert. Let me jump in. So from an agency process perspective, moving from KDP-B to KDPC means we've confirmed that you've completed your preliminary design review, and it allows them to move to critical design review, which is if you can kind of think about it as 30% of a design is PDR, 90% is your critical design review. So we're moving to the 90% design review phase, and it really moves and we also talk about it in terms of moving from formulation to development. And it's a big step when you go into development. That means you're really, we're moving, we're going now. We have nothing, as long as you don't have any big showstoppers in the preliminary design phase that make you stay there. You got to go, we assess those to see if there's things that we need to wait before we move to the critical design phase. So for the teams, this is just confirmation that they're on the right track. And so that's the technical side. On the programmatic side, that's also the time where we're really able to assess this joint cost and schedule level. We take a look at the schedule, we take a look at the cost, and then we do this joint assessment. And because we're at preliminary design, which means we're far enough along, we can actually we can do a more educated assessment of what we're talking about, and do a more rigorous assessment of what we're trying to achieve. It's just a good point for us in the agency, and it's proven, from the agency process standpoint, it's proven out to be a good time to make that commitment and move forward. So technically, the team says, I'm good to go. My preliminary design review is behind me now. And programmatically, we now have a cost and schedule target at the 70% confidence level that we can all accept and work toward as we go forward.
And I would say kind of simply, at the preliminary design review level, we understand exactly what we want to build, and it's been reviewed by an extensive team of experts within the agency. And then we understand the basic plans and processes and the activity to actually build the actual flight hardware that will actually launch at the end. So at this point, we know with enough certainty, exact detailed plans, we can actually cost, we can get people to go look at it. We've made all those trades. We're ready to home in on the actual design, head towards picking the actual components that will actually come together to make the rocket. So this is a big milestone to have all these agreements and all these trades come to conclusion to get ready to move forward, and then to be reviewed by the agency and folks outside the program that says, yes, we have the right plan to go forward, and that commits us to this KDPC milestone.
Thank you.
And our next question comes from Keith Cowan with NASAWatch.com. Your line is now open.
Question for either Bill or Mr. Lightfoot. Can you identify the specific number of SLS missions that have been baselined and identified? Can you give the name for each of those missions? And can you also tell me which of those missions actually has a real budget that's been accounted for in the coming year's budget, such that you can point to it and say, there's the full cost of that mission?
So I think, let's see, let me take a shot, Keith, and I'll let Gerst jump in. So we currently have in our planning manifest EM1, which is the SLS for EM1, which is the first exploration mission, which we will use as a uncrewed flight to test the Orion systems integrated with the SLS rocket. Then EM2 is the first human flight. We'll have a crew on that one. And those are really the two that we have, I guess, because our budget only goes out 5 years. Those are the two that are kind of in the budget planning cycle. I think that the thing to recognize, though, is we expect a cadence after that. I think we're shooting for every couple of years, depending on what the mission pool is, and sooner if we can get more mission pool. But the way we're setting up the production manufacturing here is that we have, you should expect to see, I kind of picture it in a waterfall mode. You should expect to see when we finish the rocket for EM1, as those systems are being built, we're working on EM2. We don't gap it. We continue this process of producing the vehicles. So in our budget in our budget runout that we have from the 15 budget request is the budget to do EM1, be ready for EM2, but also start working on advancing and developing the rocket from a 70 metric ton to 130 metric ton vehicle. And Gerst, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or not.
I think that's a good way of describing it. We have a series of test flights. It really starts with this December's test flight of Orion on top of a Delta IV called EFT-1. We're going to verify the heat shield, and that's really much more than just a typical flight. It has probably 80% of the avionics and software that will be in the actual Orion used on EM1. Its focus is looking at heat shield performance. That's a very big weight driver for us. It'll also let us see the actual entry systems work and operate, the parachute systems. We'll also get a chance to look at the launch abort system jettison capability. The service module has decimal panels. We get to see that during ascent off of the Delta IV. So this really rings out a large portion of the, I would say, ascent and entry systems needed in Orion. Then we go to EM1. its focus will be to look at the service module and to look at the capsule performance. We plan to take it probably to a distant retrograde orbit around the moon is our current plan today on roughly a 21 to 22-day mission. We'll return on EM1 back again. We'll get another chance to look at heat shield performance. We'll also get a chance to see vehicle performance, including the service module in deep space, which will be critical to committing crew to it. Then EM2 sits in fiscal year 21-22. That'll be the first crewed mission. If the asteroid is available to us in that time frame, we could do potentially this asteroid redirect mission with that flight. If it's not available to us, we would do that just purely as a test flight, again with crew, now focusing on the crewed systems to make sure we understand how the crew and the Orion capsule operate as a team. Again, first time we will have been in deep space with a crew mission in a long time. That'll be a pretty important activity. Then EM3 sits after that. That could either be the asteroid redirect mission or it could be another test mission. We're starting to define that test sequence and those test flows. Those will be coming in later budget cycles for EM3, EM4, EM5 on out, and we'll do those in subsequent budget cycles. But as Robert described in this budget, we have the funding for EFT1, EM1, and EM2.
And our next question comes from Bill Hardwood from CBS News. Your line is now open.
Yes, this is for Mr. Gerstenmaier. Can you give us any specifics on what has changed in your knowledge of the SLS system that has moved that date from, I guess it was originally 2017 out to 2018? I understand you don't view it as a slip in the context of this milestone, but obviously the resolution of your knowledge anyway of how the system works has improved. Can you provide anything that gives us some sense of why it's 2018 and late 2018 at that? Thanks.
Yeah, I would say, I'll say it this way, and Robert can kind of add on. You know, we look at it as our job in the program, and Todd May and the team at Marshall, their job is really to mitigate all these risks and all these problems that potentially could come about that historically we've seen in other developments. So what we've done at this point is we take this design and we put it into this math model in this system. We have a standing review board come take a look at the system, and they challenge us. They bring up, here's all the issues we've seen historically. Here's things we see specifically in your design that might be problem areas to you. Here's other uncertainties that could come about that could cause the schedule to move. They put it into this math model essentially, and it spits out a bunch of different cases, and we end up with a joint confidence level of 70% in this date of November of 2018. So that's what they're telling us, that if we don't do anything, we basically have a 70% chance of getting to that date. Our intent and the team's intent at Marshall is to go look at those problems and see what we can do to mitigate those problems. There will probably be some other problems that aren't even identified by the standing review board that will come up. And our job as a management team is to look at those problems, figure out ways to work those ahead of time and proactively, work those as they come about. So I look at it as this is the commitment that we've committed to the agency. We will be there by November of 2018. I look to my team to do better than that by holding essentially to the schedule that we've got in place today and to continue to move forward. I think you even see that on Orion. When we did the pressure test of the Orion shell, right, we had a crack show up in one of the webs in the bottom of Orion. That seems like a terrible thing, but it wasn't so bad. We were able to machine that out, put in essentially a doubler, and go ahead and continue on. Now, that took a little bit of time to do that. It was nice to have a little schedule margin to go do that, and we can accommodate that. So I think we'll start seeing that as we put the SLS together. But again, the team's job is to really stay focused, to learn from this process, to look and see historically where other programs have got in trouble, and make sure we don't fall down those same traps, and we can react and deal with those. So I see this as the external team has given us a lot of key guidance. They've given us a lot of good information. Our job is to take that information and turn it around so I can use that to avoid ending up in November 2018.
And our next question comes from Josh Barrett with SpaceAlabama.com. Your line is now open.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. My question is, I guess, more for Mr. Lightfoot, but it seems like historically one of the biggest challenges NASA faces is dealing with changing presidents and changing Congresses. So is developing a vehicle that can take us to the moon, to the asteroid belt, to Mars, kind of your answer to kind of an open-ended future?
I think what we're doing is we're building. We don't think we have an open-ended future. I mean, our goal here is to get humans to Mars, and there's many ways to get there, but you have to have capabilities that allow you to do that. And one of the capabilities we need is a heavy lift rocket, and that's what we're building here with SLS. And it's the first step on several steps that we've got to take to get folks beyond low Earth orbit and ultimately to Mars. So I think for us the challenge is not. I mean, I can't control the. All we can do is focus on what we're trying to do with our plans and our goals. We've had tremendous support, frankly, as we've gone through this process, and I want us to continue that support. And as long as we're performing, I mean, that's one reason we set this. That's what's really important about setting this date. We want to perform to this date and commit to this date, and then show that we can meet it. At that point, then we can continue the journey that we want to do, which is taking people beyond low Earth orbit to Mars. And I think we'll build those capabilities over time, and the other stuff will happen, and we'll adjust to it as we always do. But that's what we're trying to do here.
And our next question comes from Irene Schwartz with Reuters. Your line is now open.
Thanks very much. My question is for Bill. What was just out of curiosity, what was the confidence level to keep the December 17th date as the target? And also, I'm assuming that by moving it to the November 2018 date, you're not counting on any kind of budget bump, and you would stay within, I think it's about a $1.3 billion annual budget on the program. Thanks.
Yeah, the KDPC is based on the FY14 enacted, plus the president's budget from there on out. So that's the budget that was assumed to get to the 2018 and the budget number that Robert gave you, the $7.021 billion. In terms of joint confidence level for December, I don't think we ever actually really calculated that per se formally, but it's significantly less than the 70%, and I don't think we actually put all the right numbers in to go do that and run that. It turns out it's a pretty big deal to run all these assessments and analysis.
And our next question comes from Dan Leone with Space News. Your line is now open.
Hi, Bill. Hi, Robert. This is going to be a question for Bill. This mathematical model that you put in all these things and it spits out the latest you think you could possibly be ready, and it tries to consider all the risks. Are the risks that this model is considering strictly related to the development and the building of the SLS vehicle, or, for example, does it also consider things like the range may not be ready to accommodate, or the payload may not be ready for integration? Thank you.
It includes just the development activities associated with building the rocket. It doesn't include external things such as the range and other pieces. And again, this is focused just towards SLS. We will do an evaluation for the ground systems, and that will be the mobile launch platform and the pad and the VAB modifications and those activities. That will get done by the ground systems group. Robert will be receiving the information for that probably within a couple weeks here, and probably within a month or so we'll have a KDPC for the ground systems.
And Dan, ultimately what we'll do, the integrated part is what Gerst says, when we get the 3 programs done, then we do the integrated assessment, and that's what gives us the kind of the confidence that we can set a launch date from that standpoint. So once we get the 3 done, we'll do that. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't do a lot of integration between the 3 programs. I mean, that's constantly what they're doing, and the teams have really worked on that process over the last 3 years. I'd say that was originally that was one of the biggest risks for the total program. But the teams have attacked that pretty hard over the last 2 years to get to a better place for what I'll call the integrated system risk. And we have a long discussion at every one of these KDP meetings. We've had a long discussion about that integrated risk that you bring up. But that'll come in when we have the discussion about what is the launch date, not the readiness of each piece.
Our next question comes from James Dean with Florida Today. Your line is now open.
Hi,
thanks. I was wondering if you could confirm how much you spent prior to the accounting included in this KDPC on SLS and going back into money spent during Constellation on the relevant systems.
The total life cycle cost, phase A through D for SLS, is $9.695 billion. We don't include the Constellation activity in that.
Take the next question.
Okay, the next question comes from Mr. Faust. Wait just a moment. Your line is now open.
Hi, Jeff Faust, Space Review. I just want to ask about the budget. What's the significance of starting the accounting with February 2014, I believe, the date that you have there? What's sort of the milestone there that starts the clock in terms of the development budget? And then also, does that $7 billion fit into the budget profile that you have going forward, or your anticipated budget profile going forward?
Yeah. So Jeff, this is Robert. The way we account these in our process for the agency is when you enter when you have the development cost, which is the 7.021, which is phases C and D in our vernacular here. That's when you enter those phases. That's where you get the 7.021, and then the total life cycle includes this phase A through D. So when you go back to the February date you're picking, that's where you get the FY14 discussion. And then as far as this is definitely the budget we have. This is what's been enacted through 14 plus the president's budget request from. This is based on the president's budget request for 15. So the money is in our budget that we requested. This is consistent with the money that we requested in our budget.
The next question is from Mr. Eric Berger with Houston Chronicle. Your line is now open.
Hi, thanks again. This is Eric Berger with the Chronicle, and just kind of following up on James' question on the total life cycle costs. If you add in the ground systems costs in Florida, sort of to prepare for the SLS and launch from there, what does that bring that total up in addition to the $9.695 billion?
I don't have that number in front of me. We can probably get that for you. Again, this was just focused on the Space Launch System, the rocket itself, and that's the number that I gave you, and it was phase A through D. And I think the other thing too, we also need to be aware of is it's really important that we don't get too focused on just the single activity. It's really important that we get a system that's producible, that we can manufacture and fly, and that production cost and the cost of each individual flight is going to be really important to us. If we just focus on how much we spend on development and we try to reduce the development cost, and then it ends up with a design that is harder to fly or costs more to fly, then it doesn't allow us to do these things we want to do in terms of future missions. So we need to stay focused on both. So I mean, it's good to discuss these, it's good to talk about these, but it's also important to have the bigger picture in mind that we're actually building the system and we're not solely focused on just a one-off kind of rocket. It's really important we get that in place. And that's what you can see when you go down to MAF and you look at the production hardware, you look at the systems that are in place at MAF. We essentially put in a system that can produce these rocket components effectively, efficiently with state-of-the-art manufacturing, and this is where we're going to get a reasonable life cycle cost for this equipment by putting that design work and that effort.
If I could follow that up, is there an estimate of the fixed costs with carrying forward the SLS once you get past the 2017 or 2018 flight then?
And we're still refining that and reviewing that at the agency, but it's clearly a focus of how we can change the design to potentially change those fixed costs. So we're still iterating those details.
And the next question comes from Ken Kramer with Universe Today. Your line is now open.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. My question is for Bill Gerstenmaier, I believe. Can you talk about the scenario of the whole scenario of the RS-25 engines? Do you have enough for for 4 flights, but what do you do beyond that? Do you build new ones? Do you get a new engine, or what? What is NASA's thinking? What's your planning? Thank you.
We'll build new engines, and again, the beauty of what we're doing here is we can take a look at the shuttle main engines. We have a tremendous amount of test time on those engines, over 1 million seconds. We also have a really sophisticated math model of how that engine actually operates. So if there was ever a chance to inject modern manufacturing into an engine design, it is the shuttle main engine, the RS-25s. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at putting modern manufacturing into that engine where it makes sense. Some components that we used to machine that took multiple months to maybe even years to machine, we're looking at adaptive manufacturing or 3D printing to print some of those components. So we're going to go look at those pieces, and we're going to look at a way to make this engine manufacturable and essentially an expendable engine. So you can come at this 2 ways. You can come at this problem of trying to build from scratch a producible, cheap, expendable engine, or you can take an engine you have a lot of experience with and then re-engineer it the other way to make it more manufacturable. We're coming at it the other way. We're going to take this existing engine we know well, and we're going to try to drive in lean manufacturing all the way through to reduce the cost of production of this engine. That's our plan.
And our last question comes from Mr. Jason Ryan with SafeFlightInsider.com. Your line is now open.
Hey, I'm guessing my question is for Bill. Essentially, given the concerns raised by the GAO in their report, is there any possibility NASA might receive additional funds? And if they were brought up to congressional levels, is there any possibility that the first flight of SLS could still take place in 2017, or is that now totally off the board?
Again, I think the way I would look at the GAO report, they brought up some technical concerns that we need to be aware of and go manage, and we'll do those. They brought up some budgetary concerns which we're aware of, and we need to go manage those. So I think our focus is really to take this input we got from GAO and figure out a way that we can improve our confidence of delivering to the plans we've got on the table today. So that's what we'll do. In terms of what budget we get, I don't want to speculate on that. We've made the President's budget request. That's what we feel we need to do this program. We'll work with that President's budget request, and we'll continue to move forward and make as much progress as we can. If we get some significant problem somewhere along the line, we'll come back to the agency. We'll make the right trades and talk about things. But at this point, I don't think it's helpful to talk about where the budget stuff is. And I would say, right now we still have a reasonable chance of being ready with SLS. And again, I want to stress this isn't a launch date. This is an SLS readiness to fly date. I think we still have a good chance of SLS being there sometime in the December timeframe, maybe slightly into 18, depending on what happens. But it's up to our teams and our folks to take all this input we got, take the knowledge they gave us, and put it to heart and deliver as best we can an efficient system for this nation.
Thank you, Mr. Light. Mr. Gerstenmaier, would either of you like to make any additional comments? Okay, great. Thank you all for joining us today. Just a reminder, you can listen to a replay of this teleconference by dialing toll-free 866-365-4119. The passcode is 2246. Again, that number is 866-365-4119, and the passcode is 2246. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for joining today's conference. All lines may disconnect.
Combined into what we call a joint confidence level between cost and schedule, and we set that at 70% when we go through this process. This is also the commitment that we're held to in regards to breach reporting as we move through the development process. We found recently, let's say the last 3 or 4 years, that this 70% confidence level is a pretty good measure for setting our agency baseline commitment for any of the projects that we do in the agency. We also routinely have programs and projects that work to internal dates that are more aggressive, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we move forward. Like I said, I chair this review, and I hear from the program, the SLS program, the Human Exploration Mission Director in this case, come and present to the agency, and then we have a standing review board, which is a group of independent reviewers that are assembled to assess the program and bring forward their key milestones as well. I then take the advice of those folks and several other members of the convening authorities, including the chief engineer, the chief financial officer, folks like that support us, and we decide on where we should head as an agency. This is what happens on all programs and projects within the agency. So this is kind of our process from an agency standpoint, and it's a big step for us. This is the commitment that we make. So for SLS, we held our review in January, and based on the PDR results from last August. As for the technical assessment, there are absolutely no issues with the great progress the team had made, and they were cleared to proceed from a technical standpoint and press toward critical design review. In fact, as Bill Gerstenmaier will share later.
Code is 2246. That will be live about an hour after this call concludes. So now I will pass the over to Mr. Lightfoot.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon. We want to provide an update on the excellent progress we're making in development of the Space Launch System, or SLS, the heavy lift rocket that we think is going to take us beyond low Earth orbit and ultimately to the moon, to Mars. Our nation is embarked on a very ambitious space exploration program, and we owe it to the American taxpayers to get this right. And that's what this Key Decision Point C, or KDPC, process is all about. Let me give you a little background on what KDPC means for those of you that may not know. That is a critical milestone for any program or project that the agency assesses. It's comprised of two key areas of review. The first is the technical side, and the second is a programmatic assessment. I chair that meeting as the associate administrator, as the decision authority for these. For the technical side, at KDPC, the agency assesses the project's successful completion of their preliminary design review, or what we call PDR, and it grants approval to proceed to the critical design review, or CDR. On the programmatic side, the agency uses KDPC as the agency baseline commitment, ABC, as we call it, agency baseline commitment point to our external stakeholders on cost and schedule that we expect to achieve. That cost and schedule is then they're proceeding with several of the subsystem critical design reviews already. On the programmatic side, one of the requirements we work to in the agency as we set these commitment dates and dollar amounts is to reconcile the differences in assessments. And you might imagine that the Standing Review Board and the program come in and they may have a different opinion of the risk or related to some of the issues that they're going to be facing over the development cycle. So we've been wrestling with that over the past few months and trying to reconcile those. That's a requirement for us to reconcile those, so that me, as the one committing the agency to a baseline, I need to make sure we're making the right commitment and one that I can defend. Now, the reconciliation of those risks, whether they're the uncertainty levels, what we expect those risks to occur, how we expect them to happen, if they might happen, that is all fed into a model, and that model then generates based on an integrated schedule, based on the cost, will provide us a joint confidence level as we move forward. So, as I said, setting this 70% has worked well for us last few years in science, and today this is the first one we've ever done for a human spaceflight program. So it's pretty exciting for us to try to apply what we consider very much a best practice to the human exploration program as we move forward. So today what we're doing is we're rolling that out, and what we've decided approved through the Key Decision Point process, as you've probably already seen the press.
Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the Q&A session of today's call. At that time, you may press star 1 if you would like to ask a question. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to Ms. Stephanie Shearhold. Thank you. You may begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our news conference to discuss the agency's progress on the Space Launch System, the heavy lift rocket under development to take humans beyond Earth orbit and to Mars. My name is Stephanie Shearhold. Joining us today are NASA Associate Administrator Robert Lightfoot and Bill Gerstenmaier, NASA's Associate Administrator for the Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate. We'll get started shortly, but a couple of operational notes for you. Your phones are obviously on mute. To get into the question queue, you can press star 1 on your phone. After we've given remarks, then we'll open it up to questions and answers. Please stick to one question and identify to whom you're directing your question. If we have time, we'll allow reporters to ask a second question. About 1 1 hour after we conclude the call, you can listen to a replay of the teleconference. The phone number to listen to that replay is 866-365-4119. The passcode for that is 2246. Again, the replay number is 866-365-4119, and the
release is that the SLS flight is no later than November of 2018, with a budget of $7.021 billion for development, and that's at a joint confidence level of 70% for the agency. So, pretty exciting stuff for us here in terms of how we're moving forward. It's really important to note, and Bill will talk about this a little bit, that the team continues to make great progress. They're still working to the same plan they had before we set this date. This doesn't change their planning date. We recognize that they'll incur challenges as we go forward because we're getting into the meat of the program, and the folks will be moving forward from there. It's also important to remember that we're building a series of launch vehicles here, not just one. This is not just one mission. This is for us the start of a kind of a production model for how we're going to develop the vehicles we need to take folks beyond low Earth orbit. Basically, moving from a 70 metric ton vehicle for EM1 to eventually a 130 metric ton rocket that'll carry folks to Mars. So that's where we are. Again, I couldn't be more proud of the SLS team and what they've done to get us to this point. First time we've had a human spaceflight program make it through this decision gate that the agency has, and very confident as the team moves forward for SLS readiness for the first flight for EM1. We'll take some time after this. We'll hit ground systems, which will be the next piece of this, and they're following right